I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 8. Tactical Surprise. February 5th, 2021, 940 miles west of Hawaii, Johnston Atoll. Colonel Pang couldn't believe their luck when he heard the Heliborn troops had landed on the island and found it deserted. He had thought the Americans would have reinforced the atoll, or at least placed a contingent of Marines there to prevent them from seizing it. Then again, the Americans had wholly underestimated them up to this point, so why should this be any different? Looking back at the Long Hu Shan, Peng observed a couple of sailors acting as ground guides as the drivers got the Wan Shan special vehicles off the Long Hu. Each W-2400 was a specially equipped launcher platform vehicle that could carry 3 CJ-10 long-range cruise missiles, very similar to the American HIMARS system. The Long Hu had transported 20 of these vehicles, along with their crews, to the abandoned American base. The other transport ship, the Daly Shan, was carrying 3 additional missile pods per truck. All told, they had 120 CJ-10s for their upcoming mission. It took the soldiers and sailors close to an hour to get the vehicles and the additional missile pods offloaded from the 2 transport ships. Once that task had been completed, the launchers were driven over to the east side of the abandoned runway, where they'd be set up and made ready to fire. Peng and his crew were on a strict timeline. They had to have all 20 vehicles ready to fire their missiles at precisely 2100 hours, which only gave them about 9 hours before the final attack on the remaining American forces in the Pacific would start. Clear Air Force Station, Alaska. Despite the cold-weather gear and tight-fitting body armor he was wearing, Senior Airman Dutt was freezing. After spending 10 minutes letting the 2 JLTV's engines run, he couldn't wait to get back inside the building. Every few hours, one of the guys from the QRF had to go outside and turn the trucks on to let the engines run. Otherwise, they couldn't be sure they'd crank in the cold when they needed them. Dutt had drawn the short stick. While Airman Dutt loved being in the Air Force, it was moments like this he hated being stationed in Alaska. When he'd initially received his orders for Eielson AFB, he had been excited. Growing up in Montana, Dutt was an avid hunter and fisherman, so an assignment to Alaska had sounded like a dream. Then he'd arrived at the 354th Security Forces Squadron and had summarily been assigned to the Clear Air Force Station, nearly 2 hours away. Fortunately, they had a rotation system in place, so he only had to serve a week at the remote radar station once every 3 weeks. Still, he hated being at the secluded base. With the war going on, Dutt wanted to be down where the action was. A number of his friends in other squadrons had already regaled him with their combat experiences. Senior Airman Dutt had also learned that several of his classmates from technical school had been killed at Beale Air Force Base in California at the outset of the war. It angered him that here he was, itching to get into the fight, and he was stuck pulling guard duty on a remote radar base in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, far from the fighting. As Dutt reached the door that would lead him back into the warmth of their security detachment's QRF office, he entered his 6-digit code. The green light came on, letting him know the magnetic lock had turned off. Once he heard the click, he pulled the handle and walked in. The heat from inside slapped him in the face, and he immediately felt better. "Hey, close the door, man. You're letting the cold in." Grumbling to himself, Dutt closed the door and stomped his feet a couple of times to get the snow off of them. He placed his rifle on the gun rack and then began the process of unwrapping himself from all the cold weather gear and body armor. He looked over at his counterparts. 2 of them were taking a cat nap in a chair. 2 more were playing something on the Xbox, and the other 3 were watching the computer monitors that displayed several different camera images from around the base. Just as Dutt finished stripping off his cold weather gear, one of the perimeter sensors detected something. The red flashing light hanging from the ceiling in the center of the room turned on and spun rapidly in a circle. "What the hell is that?" Dutt asked. "Crap, those look like snowmobiles," his technical sergeant remarked. "Hit the alarm and alert the QRF at Eielson that we have a perimeter breach." "Everyone, suit up and grab your weapons," ordered one of the staff sergeants, who quickly threw on his winter jacket. "Someone call Bravo team and tell them to head over to Alpha's position. Tell them they are cleared to engage those hostiles." The sergeant moved faster than Dutt had ever seen the portly man move. "Miller, you stay here and monitor what's going on," called out the section chief. "You're our eyes right now, so stay on the radio and let us know what you see. The rest of you follow me out to the JLTVs and let's get going. I want those M240s manned, so don't forget your goggles and gloves. Let's go." As soon as he finished issuing orders, he hit the green lock release button on the side of the wall. The sergeant pushed the door open. Before any of them knew what had happened, an object slammed into his chest plate, throwing him backward into several of the airmen. He knocked several of them over, like a bowling ball hitting a stack of pins. Dutt had been standing to the side of the door, so he hadn't fallen. But as he looked down at his section chief, his eyes went wide. It was an RPG rocket that had hit him. For whatever reason, the rocket hadn't gone off. Whoever was out there was real trouble. Flicking his selector switch from safe to semi, Dutt dropped down and took a knee. He arched his body over to peer outside the door. Several dark-clad figures were practically on top of them, their rifles at the ready. One of the attackers fired several rounds that flew over Dutt's head and thudded into the chest of one of his friends. Dutt immediately fired several shots into the men charging toward him. His first shot hit the lead soldier right in the face, killing the man instantly. His second and third shots hit the man just to his right, clipping his neck just above his body armor. Dutt swept his rifle slightly to the left. He was just about to squeeze the trigger when his world went black. Tan Zhang fired several rounds from his QBZ-95 into the face of the American soldier who had just killed his 2 comrades. When the man dropped, Tan kept charging forward, shooting his rifle at the remaining Americans in his line of sight. As he crossed over the threshold, he could see the looks of surprise and terror on the faces of the 2 soldiers as they reached for their sidearms. Tan fired several bullets into each of them, 2 shots to the chest and 1 to the head, just like he had done 1,000 times in training. Tan could smell the cordite and sulfur from the rifle fire, followed by the feces and urine from the dead bodies he now found himself surrounded by. Seeing no one else left alive in the room, Tan walked over to the computer terminal. He pushed the dead American out of the chair, letting his body fall on a heap on the floor amongst the shell casings and blood. Then he grabbed a couple of tissues from his pocket and wiped the blood and brain matter off the computer monitor so he could see it. One team of snowmobiles was headed toward the phased radar array they'd come to blow up. The other group was moving in on the building their intelligence briefer had said was the operations room, directly behind the radar building. After a couple of seconds, he realized that 2 armored vehicles were heading toward the team that was speeding toward the radar. Tan grabbed his radio and sent that team a quick warning. With his work here done, Tan pulled the pin on 2 thermite grenades and tossed them to either side of the building as he exited. Once they'd exploded, he grabbed the corpses of his 2 dead comrades and placed them in one of the American JLTV vehicles. He took the knife from one of his friend's pockets, pulled out one of their Siberian Tiger playing cards, and stabbed it to the outer wall of the building he'd just torched, leaving their unit's calling card behind. As Tan drove the American vehicle toward the radar building, the sounds of battle intensified. When he made it over to the top of the slight hill he'd been climbing, he saw the 105-foot-tall building that enclosed the world's largest phased-array radar system. This tall but unassuming structure fed information to NORAD and U.S. Space Command about ground and submarine-launched missiles across much of Asia, as well as all space-based objects that passed through its massive arc of coverage. As he approached the building, Tan saw one of the American JLTVs had several of his comrades pinned down. He floored it a bit more, until he was within 100 meters of the Americans. They didn't respond to his approach, most likely assuming that he was there to reinforce them. Tan climbed out of the driver's side of the vehicle and climbed back into the rear of the truck. He was just about to move up to the turret when he spotted something. He smiled and reached for the AT-4 rocket he'd found. Tan flipped the turret hatch open and climbed up. Pulling the safety pin off the AT-4, he aimed it at the JLTV that was firing on his comrades and depressed the trigger. Pop, swoosh, bam! The truck exploded. The Americans in the other gun truck turned around with a look of shock and confusion on their faces at what had just happened. Tan grabbed the machine gun mounted on the turret and let loose a string of bullets at them. Several of them scattered for cover while a couple more were mowed down. Tan's comrades, who moments earlier had been completely pinned down, now joined the fray. Together, they finished off the remaining airmen still shooting at them. With the immediate threats neutralized, the two teams went to work completing their mission. One of the teams blew open the door to the building that housed the phased array, while the other group proceeded to breach the main building where the radar operators were located. A flurry of shots rang out as the Chinese soldiers moved through the building, killing the operators inside. Tan knew that in the meantime, the other group would apply explosives to the radar equipment inside the massive structure. When they were ready to leave, the remaining team members climbed into Tan's vehicle and the other JLTV that hadn't been blown up. The group quickly made their way off the little base to head for their next target. As they left the air station, one of the soldiers depressed the red button on the remote detonator. Behind them, a massive explosion blossomed in the darkness. Mission accomplished, Tan thought with satisfaction. Despite the loss of half of their Special Forces group, they had effectively blinded the Americans' ability to monitor sea and ground-launched ballistic missiles, as well as any space-based weapons and satellites over much of the Asian continent. Cavalier Air Force Station, North Dakota. One of Rip's Special Forces soldiers broke the early morning quiet. "I've got movement," he announced. 3 SUVs moving down County Road 89. They just passed mile marker 12. Rip looked through his own night vision goggles, scanning until he spotted what looked like 3 Chevy Tahoes moving at a rapid clip toward the base. He grabbed his radio receiver and pushed the talk button. "Hellboy to Reaper 5, we've got confirmation of the target. You're cleared to engage." 10,000 feet above them, an MQ-9 Reaper drone was loitering, steered by a UAV pilot at Creech Air Force Base nearly 1,000 miles away. "Reaper 5 to Hellboy, that's a good copy. I have 3 Chevy Tahoes passing mile marker 11. Is that the right target?" The drone pilot had to confirm before he fired off his Hellfire missiles. "Yes, that's the target. Take him out." Rip watched and waited as the group of SUVs continued to get closer and closer to the radar installation. Boom, boom, boom! 3 deafening explosions ripped through the darkness. The flaming blasts briefly turned the scene into a spectacular display of precision firepower. "Reaper 5, Hellboy. Good hit. Continue to stay on station. There may be additional hostiles in the area." "That's a good copy. Returning to station. From our vantage point, we don't show any additional vehicle traffic within a 20-mile radius of your position." Smiling, Rip felt a certain level of satisfaction at having just prevented a major attack that could have debilitated his nation's early warning radar system. February 6th, 2021, 12:41 a.m. NORAD facility. General Tibbets had just lain down on the couch in his office to take a much-needed nap. As of today, they were officially 3 weeks into this civil war and UN-led invasion of his country, and the unrelenting tempo was exhausting. How could this have happened to our country? He wondered, as he tried to calm his mind for some rest. Tibbets would have paid good money for 24 hours of uninterrupted sleep. He needed a chance to rest his mind and allow his body to unwind from the constant stress of his position. He hadn't left the mountain or seen his wife in nearly 4 days. I can't go on like this indefinitely, Tibbets realized. He made plans to try and escape back to his home in the near future. Tibbets knew he'd been pushing himself too hard. The 20-plus-hour days and lack of sleep, exercise, and proper diet were all taking their toll on him physically and mentally. The truth was, he had a hard time allowing himself a chance to relax when so many men and women were fighting and dying on the front lines. A big part of him felt that if they couldn't have a break, then neither should he. His mind had just slipped into a dreamless sleep when his office door suddenly burst open. He practically jumped off his couch, ready to attack whoever had stormed his office. Seeing the startled look on the general's sleepy face, the intruding Air Force major immediately declared, "Sir, I apologize for not knocking. I'm so sorry to disturb you." General Tibbets half growled. "This had better be good," he said grumpily. "I told everyone I didn't want to be interrupted for at least 4 hours. Sir, the Special Forces team we placed near Cavalier Air Force Station just took out those Chinese Special Forces the NSA said was going to attack the facility." Crap. The attack is really going to happen today, he thought. Tibbets stood up and immediately started walking to the watch center. "What about Clear Station?" he asked. "Please tell me it's still operational." The major shook his head as they walked together down the hallway. "We received a message from them a few minutes ago, saying they were under some sort of attack. Their QRF was moving to engage, but then the base went silent, and the radar feed cut out. Eielson launched their QRF, but they are still 20 minutes out." As he entered the cavernous room that constituted the watch center, General Tibbets immediately confirmed that their radar coverage over much of Asia was gone. With Thulu Station, Beale, and Cape Cod having gone down at the outset of the war, they were now essentially operating in the dark. This left them utterly open to a sneak attack by either Russia or China. Tibbets said a prayer that their few remaining satellites continued to stay functional. General Tibbets heard the watch officer on duty, Colonel Jessup, issuing orders. "Someone send a message over to Stratcom to scramble their birds. I want additional Global Hawks launched. See if we can reposition some of our satellites to plug the holes in our coverage until we can figure out what the heck is going on." Tibbets strode over. "Jessup, talk to me. What's happening?" Jessup, a rising star in the space operations side of the Army, turned to face the general. "Sir, approximately 42 minutes ago, one of our SOSA sensors detected a Type 94 Jin-class ballistic missile submarine pass near our Wake Island monitoring facility. We immediately ordered a Poseidon to go hunt it down and sink it. Then our Pave-Paw radar system at Clear Air Station went down, and we got a report that Cavalier Air Station was in the process of being attacked by what appeared to be a Chinese Special Forces team. When I had a runner go wake you up, I authorized the Special Forces on the ground to engage the enemy before they could reach the base. A Reaper drone just blew up the 3 SUVs carrying the assault team." Tibbets nodded. "Good job ordering that assault team to be taken out with the Reaper, Colonel." He ran his fingers through his hair. "So, Do you think everything that's happening is a precursor to them hitting us with some sort of ballistic missile attack? It's what I would do if I were them, Jessup responded, a look of concern on his face. Just then, a flashing red light turned on, and a voice came on over the PA system. Ballistic missile launch detected. Tibbets cursed to himself. This is it, the big attack, he muttered. He'd barely been able to get brought up to speed, and now this. It was all happening too fast. Someone find out what kind of missile that is and where it's going, demanded Jessup. A few seconds went by before one of the satellite operators responded. We have another bird coming online now. Should have data on the missile location momentarily. For roughly 20 seconds, they saw several missile tracks appear to come from the ocean near Wake Island, where they had detected that Chinese boomer sub. Then the satellite went offline before they could confirm the type and number of missiles. What the hell happened to our satellites? Barked Tibbets. It looks like it was just taken out. Probably a ground-based laser, one of the specialists replied. Tibbets popped his knuckles angrily. He knew he needed to get more information about what was going on before he called the president. Whether or not those missiles were nuclear and where they were headed would make a huge difference in determining how they responded. Sir, that P-8 that was heading over to engage that enemy submarine is giving us a visual report of 6 subsurface missile launches, called out another officer who was also monitoring the situation. They've just released their torpedoes and should have the enemy sub taken care of shortly. For the moment, Tibbets waved off the naval success. Where are those missiles heading now? He barked. We'll know in 3 more minutes, called out one of the communications officers. We have another satellite coming over the horizon. Some of our Arleigh Burkes on picket duty around Hawaii will also be able to start transmitting some telemetry shortly. We're in the process of repositioning one of our E-4 aircraft to fill the communications gap from the loss of the satellites. While they waited for more data to stream in, Tibbets worked on getting the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon spun up on what was going on. He also ordered the Secret Service to work on getting the president woken up. Telemetry starting to come up, shouted one of the officers at a computer terminal. Data finally streamed into them as the comms gap started to get filled in. Jessup and Tibbets both turned to look at the big board, which was now tracking the missiles. 2 of them appeared to be turning to head on a westward track, while the other 2 were now headed on an eastward trajectory. The last 2 missiles appeared to have split off from their formation, with one heading south while the other headed north, still gaining altitude as they raced toward their intended targets. An Air Force captain, sitting at one of the computer terminals, turned to look at the general. We'll have definitive targeting data on these missiles in a couple of minutes from the Pine Gap facility. Right now, it appears that 4 of the missiles are headed for Guam and Hawaii. I'm not sure about the other 2. There isn't an obvious land target further north or south of where those missiles are headed. One of the naval officers suddenly stood up. Sir, the Roosevelt Strike Group is north of Hawaii. That missile heading north could be meant for them. The Reagan Strike Group is to the south. They could be trying to take out our carriers in one swoop, another officer said. A stream of obscenities flew out of Tibbets' mouth. Get me the president, he barked. And close the blast doors. Move us from DEFCON 3 to DEFCON 2. Warning, missile launch detected. The automated alarm blared out a new warning for them to worry about. This missile launched appeared to originate from Manzanillo, Mexico. Seconds later, the alarm blared a 3rd time. Warning, missile launch detected. To their collective horror, they saw a single missile track emanate from Base 22 in Taipei, central China, the primary nuclear weapons storage facility for the PLA rocket force, where their main ICBM base was located. What the hell? Where are those missiles headed, and what type are they? Demanded General Tibbets. He watched in horror as the new missile tracks were being plotted on the big screen for them to watch. He felt a bead of sweat dripping down his forehead as he realized this was likely a major nuclear attack underway. Pine Gap's starting to get some telemetry readings on those submarine-launched missiles. They're not CSS N-14, sir. It's definitive. Those are nukes, not conventional warheads. Pointing at the two tracks rising in altitude and beginning to take a separate arc over the American Southwest, Tibbets demanded, "What type of missiles are those, and what are they targeting?" "This is Stratcom," said one of the technicians from the Omaha base, speaking through a telecom. "Those missile launches from Mexico are confirmed Dongfeng 26s. Sensors confirm they are carrying nuclear warheads." "What about that new launch from the mainland?" demanded Tibbets. An Air Force major was on the phone with his counterpart at the Pine Gap facility in Central Australia. For the briefest of moments, everyone waited for his response to the general's question. He pulled the receiver down to his shoulder and looked up at the general. "The single launch from Taibai is a Dongfeng 31A. It's one of their long-range ICBMs. This one is headed for Pine Gap, and it appears to be nuclear as well." Colonel Jessup smacked his fist into his hand angrily. "The Chinese are looking to take us out in the Pacific," he remarked to Tibbets, just above a whisper. Tibbets cursed under his breath. Just as they were starting to collect all the information they needed to brief the president, more of the satellites that had been providing them with real-time intelligence over Asia blinked out of existence. Then several of their satellites providing communications and surveillance over the continental U.S. went offline, leaving them entirely in the dark. "What the hell just happened, people?" General Tibbets roared. Colonel Jessup started barking at some folks for answers. Then he made a beeline over to a station being manned by an Army NCO who was responsible for maintaining their UHF, VHF, and FM ground radios. "Sergeant, patch us through to Stratcom, the Pentagon, and the White House through our backup system, now!" Jessup ordered. The sergeant speedily began the process of making contact with those parties via their alternate communication protocols. Tibbets turned to the officer who, moments ago, had had the president on the line. "Is he still there?" The young man nodded. "Yes, this line is a dedicated hard line." "I've got Stratcom on the radio," called out the Army sergeant as he made his first successful connection. Tibbets walked over and was handed the radio receiver before the sergeant went back to work, trying to raise the Pentagon. "Talk to me, Norman," Tibbets said gruffly. "They just took our satellites out. That's why we've lost communications," General Norman responded. "We think they hit them with a DDoS attack, because Cavalier Air Force Station is still showing them in orbit. I've directed Cybercom to figure out what the hell is going on, and the NSA is working on a counterattack right now. In the meantime, I'm switching the National Command Authority over to our alternate systems while we scramble some RC-135 rivet joints out of Offutt Air Force Base. I've also ordered the E-4 NEACPs to get airborne and help fill in the gaps. Give me 15 minutes, General, and I'll have most of our capabilities back up and running. Norman, get the Looking Glass airborne and scramble our TACAMO planes," Tibbets ordered. "This appears to be a first strike, and I have no idea if we're going to have more missiles raining down on us soon or not. We're not going to get caught flat-footed like we did on the first day of the war." "I can't believe this is happening," General Tibbets thought. The whole thing seemed like a nightmare unfolding. Two nuclear powers on a collision course could see the world destroyed multiple times over if things couldn't be brought back under control. The Army sergeant nearby announced, "I have the president. They've moved him down to the Peoc, so we're communicating with him from there." Before Tibbets started briefing the president, he turned to Colonel Jessup. "Move us from DEFCON 2 to DEFCON 1. Begin dispersing your strategic assets and scramble all of our bombers and boomers, now," he ordered. He grabbed the phone from the sergeant. "Mr. President, this is General Tibbets." "General, what the hell is going on?" Sachs demanded. "Did I just hear you say you're moving us to DEFCON 1 and scrambling our bombers?" "Yes, Mr. President. we're tracking a total of 9 ballistic missiles launched by the Chinese at the continental U.S. and our military forces overseas. 6 missiles were launched from one of China's ballistic missile stubs around Wake Island. We have a high degree of certainty that these missiles are nukes. 4 of them are heading toward our bases at Guam and Hawaii. We also have single missiles headed toward the Roosevelt and Reagan carrier strike groups in the North and South Pacific. He paused for a second. Sir, we're also tracking a single missile launched from mainland China and 2 originating from Mexico. When Tibbets didn't hear an immediate response from Sachs, he continued. The missile launch from mainland China appears to be going after the Pine Gap facility in central Australia. It's a key base in our global signals intelligence apparatus. Judging by the targets they are going after, it would appear they are trying to take out our naval and air presence in the Pacific and completely blind us as to what's going on along the west coast and the southwest border. To further compound the problem, they've just taken down more than a dozen of our satellites covering Asia and the continental U.S. President Sachs groaned. You said there were 2 missiles fired at us from Mexico. Where are they headed, and when are they expected to hit? He asked. The 2 missile launches from Mexico were still gaining in altitude, but one appears to be targeting Southern California, while the other appears to be heading towards Texas. Tibbets heard a short pause, followed by a few curse words from those in the room with the president. The phone went silent for a moment. Tibbets confirmed that the line hadn't gone dead. Sachs must have placed the call on mute temporarily. When he came back, the president said, General, my advisors here tell me we should have some of our digital communications back up again, once more of the E-4s get airborne. I'm also being told by the Secret Service that they'd like to get me in the air in case Washington is a possible target. Let's reconvene in 10 minutes. I'd like you to have some recommendations for how we should respond to this attack once I'm airborne. General Tibbets let out his breath in a huff. He knew it would take them longer than 10 minutes to get the president to Air Force One. They needed a decision now. Hoping to get Sachs' attention before he ended the call, he practically shouted, We don't have 10 minutes, Mr. President. Some of these missiles are going to hit in the next 8 minutes. Sachs dropped a few F-bombs before he responded, What do you want me to do, General? I'm not staying in another flipping bunker and waiting for the Chinese to nuke me. I'm getting on that helicopter to Andrews. He let out a grunt. We'll reconvene when I'm on Air Force One, Tibbets. Do your best to shoot these missiles down, and we'll go over our response once I'm in the air. The president then hung up the phone, leaving Tibbets fuming. He wanted to get an immediate response on the way to China, but he'd need Sachs's permission for that. He smacked his hand down on the table in frustration. Then he took a deep breath and let it out in a huff. He realized he needed to get back to the task at hand, figuring out how they were going to stop these missiles from wiping out their only forward naval bases and carriers in the Pacific. Okay, people, he said loudly to whoever was in earshot. We've temporarily lost our picture over the Pacific and Asia, but that doesn't mean we don't know what's inbound and what's going to happen. Let's get a flash message to the strike groups to begin dispersing their ships and prepare for a nuclear attack. Get a message out to our bases on Guam and Hawaii that they have an inbound ballistic missile attack. Then send an alert to our missile bases out west of a possible inbound nuclear attack. Yes, sir, several people replied. A flurry of activity began. What are our options for stopping these missiles? Bellowed Tibbets. An army captain stood up from behind his computer terminal. Sir, we have a THAAD system at Anderson and another one on Wheeler Army Airfield. They should be engaging those missiles now. One of the naval LNOs interjected. We've got the USS Hopper on patrol near Pearl. I'm sure they are working in tandem with the THAADs to knock those missiles out of the sky. One of the Air Force officers piped up. General, one of our Rivet joint aircraft is sending us the targeting data from that missile launch from Mexico. It's beginning to arc towards Southern California and Texas. impact in 4 and 5 minutes, respectively. The USS Princeton's SM-3s are engaging the missile headed towards Southern California, one of the naval LNOs announced. One of the Air Force officers stood up. "We've got a problem," he yelled. He still had a hand receiver held to his ear from whatever group he was talking to. "Our radar just detected a cone shroud being ejected right after that last booster phase completed." "Holy crap, those 2 missiles are MIRVs," called out an Air Force colonel. "Get more interceptors airborne, now!" Colonel Jessup shouted. They watched the monitors in horror as the re-entry vehicles made their final turn and course correction before their final descent. At first, they'd each started off as 1 warhead, but then a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th were released. Now, the 12 projectiles angled towards their targets, starting their final descent towards the American west and southwest border at a rate of 25,000 miles per hour. As Tibbets looked at the big board displaying the 12 warheads, dozens of missiles began to lift off from several locations along the U.S. southern border. The Army's THAAD systems fired their interceptors to try and interdict the warheads. In another 3 minutes, their Patriot PAC-3 batteries would join the fray, sending their own interceptors up. A naval officer frantically shouted, "The Princeton's firing more SM-3s!" A few seconds later, the blue naval icon identifying the Princeton showed a new interceptor icon appearing every couple of seconds as the ship fired off additional missiles as quickly as it could. 2 more Arleigh Burke destroyers joined in, firing their SM-3s at the incoming threats. Steadily, the interceptors raced toward their assigned targets until the first one appeared to collide with its target. One of the naval officers yelled, "Splash 1!" as the 2 objects impacted. A few cheers erupted as one of the 5 warheads was destroyed. "Splash 2! Splash 3! Splash 4!" General Tibbets was starting to feel cautiously optimistic, until the interceptor heading for the warhead descending on the Yuma Proving Grounds suddenly missed. The missile and warhead sailed right past each other. Tibbets held his breath as the next layer of interceptors from the Patriot PAC-3 went after the remaining warhead. The first interceptor missed, then the second. The 3rd missile didn't connect either. 10 seconds after the interceptors missed, the warhead reached 5,000 feet in altitude and detonated, whiting out the aerial picture over the base and dozens of kilometers around the city of Yuma. Several people shouted torrents of curse words. Others stopped what they were doing and silently stared at the screens, unable to take their eyes off what had just happened. Colonel Jessup clapped his hands together loudly to snap everyone out of their state of shock. "We still have other warheads to worry about, people. Let's stay focused," he bellowed. Just then, Major General Estrada came running into the room. "Where are those warheads over Texas targeting?" he demanded. Estrada made his way over to General Tibbets as people scrambled to find him an answer. Estrada still had his gym clothes on and sweat streaked down his back. He'd run across the mountain fortress through one checkpoint after another to get to the ops center when the missile launch warning had blared over the PA and the facility had begun to go on lockdown. The last remaining warhead falling on San Diego managed to dodge the remaining SM-3s and then detonated at an altitude of 50,000 feet. "I think it blew up early," commented an Air Force lieutenant, apparently unaware of what a high-altitude detonation meant. Colonel Jessup shook his head. "It didn't blow up early. The electromagnetic pulse generated from that blast just blanketed Southern California, northern Mexico, and the entire U.S. military force along the border. That EMP will plunge the region back into the Dark Ages." Turning to one of the communications officers, Jessup ordered, "Send a flash message out to our strike groups and facilities, letting them know some of these warheads may be EMPs. They need to power down their radios, radars, and any other electronic equipment. Make sure they get our planes and other assets indoors if there's still time." General Tibbets barely restrained himself from punching a wall. This situation was unfolding into an utter disaster. His forces in Yuma had already been obliterated, an EMP had neutered his California forces, and the attack wasn't even over yet. On top of it all, they still didn't have a clear picture of what was happening in Hawaii and the rest of the Pacific. One of the Air Force officers announced, "The THAAD missiles are starting their intercepts over Texas." The warhead descending on El Paso and the U.S. ground forces at Fort Bliss blinked out of existence. Tibbets let out a huge sigh of relief as his eyes now turned to the one heading toward Dyess Air Force Base. An interceptor nailed it, too. Then the one heading for Fort Hood disappeared as well. The remaining warheads were heading towards the McAllister Army Ammunition Plant in McAllister, Oklahoma, the Red River Army Depot near Texarkana, Texas, and the Pine Bluff Arsenal in Arkansas. Without a second to spare, the missiles headed toward Red River and Pine Bluff collided with their targets. Then a white spot generated on the map over the McAllister Army Ammunition Plant. A mixture of gasps and profanity filled the room. In less than 30 seconds, they had witnessed 2 nuclear detonations on American soil, something no one could have imagined. General Tibbets was frozen for a moment, unable to respond to the horror show he'd been watching. General Estrada leaned over to him and put his hand on his shoulder. "I know this isn't going to bring you a lot of comfort right now, but we did a good job. We just intercepted 9 out of 12 warheads. The enemy didn't take out our forces along the Texas border, nor did they nail our strategic air bases. Right now, the Chinese hit us with an EMP over San Diego and 2 conventional nukes that didn't cripple us. We still have those missiles in the Pacific to worry about, but we'll pull through this." Just then, one of the computer monitors near General Tibbets' desk came on with the image of the President and several of his advisors aboard Air Force One. "Thanks, Estrada. I needed that," Tibbets said. He took a deep breath and let it out. Then he moved over to the chair in front of the monitors so he could speak with the President. When Sachs saw Tibbets, he immediately tore into him. "General, what the hell is going on? We're looking at a map right now that shows nuclear detonations in Arizona, California, and Oklahoma. We still have multiple missiles heading towards Hawaii, Guam, Australia, and 2 of our naval strike groups that we aren't even able to see right now. What are we doing to stop them?" Tibbets steeled his nerves. "The detonation over San Diego was an EMP, Mr. President. It wasn't a direct nuclear detonation over the city. This warhead was designed to fry the electronics of Southern California and northern Mexico, probably in anticipation of a Chinese ground invasion. The other 2 detonations were airbursts, around 5,000 feet above their intended targets. Unfortunately, the hit we took in Yuma effectively wiped out about 12,000 soldiers and Marines we had positioned there to defend the border. The detonation in Oklahoma hit the McAllister munitions plant and the nearby city. Before you ask me any further questions, Mr. President, we should have data on those missiles heading towards Hawaii, Guam, Australia, and our 2 carrier strike groups momentarily." "Damn it, what are we doing to stop those missiles, General?" the President shouted. His face looked ashen. "We've got a THAAD in Guam and Hawaii, along with Arleigh Burke destroyers, that should be engaging those missiles as we speak. The strike groups are also engaging the missiles with their own interceptors. We're in the process of repositioning some new satellites, along with moving some aircraft around to get our communications with Hawaii and the Pacific back up and running. Unfortunately, though, that EMP over Southern California did put another dent in our communications ability." There was a lot of commotion going on around behind Tibbets. He knew more information was coming in, and he should probably get back to it. "Mr. President, I'd like to keep this link open, but I need to keep an eye on what's happening," he insisted. "Yes, General, please do. But I'd like to start working on getting some sort of response going right now," Sachs responded. "General Marcus is telling me that with our satellites and other radar stations down, it's possible the Chinese may have launched more missiles at us, and we won't even know about it right away." His face registered a mix of fear and concern. Tibbets saw General Marcus sitting next to the president, along with a military officer carrying the nuclear football. He had the briefcase opened on the table next to Sachs. While Tibbets couldn't see the new Secretary of Defense with him, he did see the National Security Advisor. "Where's Secretary Howell?" asked General Tibbets. Secretary Mike Howell had taken over as the new head of the Pentagon a few days ago. General Marcus explained. "He was visiting Fort Benning when everything started. I've directed one of the looking-glass planes to go pick him up and get him airborne. They should be there in another hour. Secretary Cagle wasn't able to make it to Andrews in time, so we're having her picked up by one of the Takamo planes before it heads out to run figure-eights over the Atlantic." "What are your orders for us, Mr. President?" Tibbets asked. Solemnly, he pulled his nuclear codebook out. Then he removed the dog tags from under his shirt and used a small key on the chain to unlock the codebook. Before the president could respond, one of the officers behind Tibbets announced, "Sir, we've re-established our link with the Roosevelt Strike Group." The general turned to look at the new information and saw that all 6 of the warheads had been successfully intercepted. The same officer explained, "Sir, the strike group commander says they succeeded in intercepting the warheads targeting them. They said the THAAD in Hawaii destroyed 11 of the 12 warheads fired at them, but it appears one warhead detonated at a high altitude above the island. They believe this was a targeted EMP blast. Right now the strike group commander says they are tracking close to 100 CJ-10 long-range cruise missiles inbound to our facilities on Hawaii, emanating from the Johnston Atoll." Turning to face the naval LNO, Tibbets asked, "What about the Reagan? Are they able to intercept those cruise missiles?" The naval officer's face looked ashen as he replied, "No. The Reagan strike group has been destroyed. 2 of the warheads got through. We haven't been able to make contact with anyone from the strike group." General Marcus called out to Tibbets, "General, we just spoke with the Brits. They are piping us into their satellite system right now. The NSA should have a new picture for us of the Pacific shortly. Did the Ministry of Defense tell you how it's looking? Do we have more missiles inbound?" asked Tibbets. He hoped this was it. The president jumped in. "They said Guam's gone. At least 2 of the warheads hit the island. There isn't anything left. They also said Pine Gap was knocked out. The missile aimed at Australia hit most of the country with a series of EMPs detonating at 50,000 feet and 30,000 feet. It looks like a huge part of the country is going to be in the dark." Then, just as the NSA got the British satellite system linked to the DoD, the entire system went down. Not only did they lose their momentary picture, but now the entire Department of Defense NIPR, SIPR, and JWIC's communication systems had blacked out. The president shouted, "Oh my God, seriously? What is happening? Why are our screens blacked out again?" General Norman's face suddenly appeared on the screen to answer the question. "Mr. President, one of my folks is telling me we just got hit with some sort of cyber attack. We're not sure how it happened, but it appears it's trying to take our communication system down." The general paused for a moment as someone off-camera handed him a sheet of paper, which he quickly scanned before returning his gaze to Sachs. "Mr. President, I was just informed that AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint are all experiencing a massive cyber attack against their cellular and internet networks as well." General Tibbets broke back into the conversation. "Mr. President, the Chinese just hit us with a concerted nuclear first strike attack against our forces in the Pacific and the continental U.S. They are now in the process of blinding and muting our military by taking out our satellites, cellular communications, and email system. They're shutting down our civilian internet and cellular networks, which will cripple our ability to communicate domestically and inhibit our government's ability to govern and manage the country. I recommend that you order an immediate counterstrike against the Chinese and their military." General Norman from Stratcom announced, "I second that recommendation. We certainly have our justification, sir. There was a short pause, as the President talked briefly with General Marcus. Finally, Sachs looked back to General Tibbets. I agree, General, he confirmed. It's time to hit back. Tibbets nodded. Has General Marcus advised you on some possible scenarios? Do you have a particular one you'd like to discuss? At this point, Tibbets had flipped open his launch book, which had a multitude of different attack options. He thumbed his way over to the China tab, revealing the target package names that had been pre-selected. Right now, I'm leaning towards Red Diamond 5, Sachs responded. What are your thoughts? Tibbets moved his finger down the page until he found the target package the President had suggested. Red Diamond 5 was an attack on PLA rocket force silos, storage and launch facilities, command and control bunkers, and PLA group headquarters throughout the country. Yeah, this should neutralize them from launching any further nuclear attacks on us, Tibbets thought. General Tibbets looked back up at Sachs. I concur, Mr. President. This is a well-measured response. It'll hit them hard and send the right message. He paused for a second before he added, Mr. President, I highly recommend that you try to get through to the Russian president and inform him of what we're about to do. I don't want them to think this attack may be directed at them. Tell them we are retaliating against the Chinese attack on our soil. And although we don't want to involve them in this issue, if they attempt to intercede or prevent us from striking back, we will not hesitate to attack them as well. That's a good call, General, President Sachs answered. Yes, I'll place a call to him immediately. If that bastard tries to intervene, we'll unleash our missiles on them. Let's go ahead and get the ball rolling, Tibbets. I want to know when our response is on the way. Then Sachs resumed his conversation with some of the others in the room with him. Just as Tibbets was about to execute the President's directive, Sachs added, Oh, and General, I want you to hit that dam. We warned them what would happen if they attacked us. They detonated a nuke on U.S. soil and took out Guam. I want the Three Gorges Dam included in our response. Guam, Anderson Air Force Base. Major Gillian Heinkel of the 11th Bomb Squadron grabbed for her flight helmet as she followed her co-pilot out the door of the building. As she burst through the door and onto the parking ramp of the flight lane, she heard air raid klaxons wailing. Their high-pitched screams swelled before fading out and then repeating the sequence. Running towards her B-52H bomber, Heinkel saw that the ground crew was already pulling the engine covers off and removing the chocks from the wheels. Another airman rolled out the aircraft generation equipment and hooked it up to the plane, ready to give the engines the jolt of electricity they needed until the aircraft was able to provide its own power. As Major Heinkel raced to her baby, the sudden roar of a bomber racing down the runway at full power only caused her to run harder. The two bombers that had been strip alert were already getting themselves airborne. She needed to hurry. When she reached the ladder that would allow her to climb into the bomber, she had to wait a moment for her co-pilot, who had beat her to the aircraft, to finish getting in. Heinkel looked back. Behind her, the rest of the flight crew was huffing and puffing from the mad dash they had just made from the ready room. Once she had climbed aboard the bomber, Major Heinkel raced up the second flight of steps to get to her flight deck. She practically jumped into her seat. Her co-pilot was already going through his reduced checklist to get them ready. Heinkel had just fastened her helmet on and attached it to the aircraft's comms and life support system when she heard the first radio call. All jigs elements, this is not a drill. I say again, this is not a drill, said the commanding voice of her squadron leader. The command post is tracking multiple ballistic missiles inbound. All jigs elements are to get airborne and head to your rally points and await further orders. As Heinkel began flipping some power switches and prepared to start the main engines, her co-pilot asked, What the hell is going on, Major? Missiles? Inbound? His voice cracked and trembled with fear. Without turning to look at the junior officer, Heinkel pushed the start button to activate her engines. Hey, snap out of it, she quipped. Just do your job and let's get this bird airborne. We can talk about it once we're off the ground. Right now, I need you focused on the task at hand. Got it?" She knew she didn't have time to get distracted or hold his hand through this crisis. Moments later, the engines fired up. She revved them up a bit and then released the parking brakes, allowing them to start rolling down the parking ramp. Major Heinkel depressed the talk button on her comm system. "This is Big Bella. We're heading down the taxiway 1 Alpha. Permission for immediate takeoff?" A moment later, her radio crackled. "Tower to Big Bella, permission granted. Hurry up, you don't have much time until impact," the voice said. Heinkel could hear the fear in the man's voice, even over the radio. She knew they were scared, because whatever was headed their way, they weren't going to be able to hide from it. At least she stood a chance of getting out of Dodge. Heinkel turned the lumbering aircraft hard as she moved off the taxiway and onto the runway. She felt as though the plane almost tipped over to one side, and she knew the wing wheel was probably straining severely from the maneuver she had just done. "Major, I'm showing a missile impact in less than 60 seconds, called out the radio control officer below the flight deck. Heinkel pushed the engine throttle all the way forward as she gave the engines as much power as she possibly could. Instantly, the massive bomber lurched forward as it sped down the runway, breaking every procedure in the book on how to take off without damaging the aircraft or its engines. Right now, she was just hoping and praying they had enough time to get off the runway before that missile hit. She also prayed it wasn't a nuclear missile headed their direction, or none of this would matter. They'd be vaporized before they got far enough away. Big Bella raced down the runway, palm trees and hangars whipping past her window with blinding speed. She felt the wings start to lift as her speed continued to climb. She pulled back on the wheel and felt the bomber's nose start to lift up. It took a second or two more before she felt the plane leave the runway and begin to claw its way into the sky. The landscape below her began to change as their bomber left the island and made it over the water. Her altimeter read 500 feet and still climbing. "Brace for impact!" shouted the radar operator moments later. As Major Heinkel continued to wheel her aircraft further away from Anderson Air Force Base, everything suddenly whited out. What had, moments before, been a bright blue sky with a few clouds interspersed was suddenly bright as the sun. In that instant, Gillian Heinkel knew she was dead. She hadn't made it far enough outside the blast wave. Fractions of a second later, Big Bella was violently tossed through the air and then ripped apart by the force of a nuclear detonation. Johnston Atoll. Colonel Pang watched the horizon as he listened to 690 AM on the radio, a news talk station broadcasting out of Hawaii. Pang smiled when he heard the emergency alert noise, which reminded him of a fax signal, interrupted the broadcast. "This is the emergency alert broadcasting system. This is not a test. All residents of the Hawaiian Islands are advised that a ballistic missile has been detected targeting the island chain. Again, this is not a test. Please seek immediate shelter and stay away from any glass windows. This has been a message from the emergency alert broadcasting system." Pang felt a feeling of glee considering the fear and panic that must be spreading across the islands. The people of Hawaii had nowhere to go and no way of avoiding the nuclear fire that was about to rain down on them. "The missile to our south should be impacting shortly," announced a young captain to the officers who had gathered around him. They all looked to the south, waiting with bated breath for the flash that would indicate a successful detonation. They were more than 800 miles away, so the flash wouldn't blind them, and the EMP wouldn't reach them. The seconds ticked by anxiously. Then they saw a bright flash off in the horizon, like a prolonged lightning strike. "I wish we could see the mushroom cloud," commented one of the officers. Turning to look at the soldier manning the computer terminal, Pang asked, "What about the other missile, the one north of Hawaii?" The man had a perplexed look on his face. "Sir, it appears that all but one of the warheads were intercepted." Grunting at the info, Pang asked, Do we know which one hit?" The soldier nodded. "It looks like the EMP got through, but the others didn't." Pang let out a sigh of relief. He knew the EMP would help them in their own attack. However, he had hoped one of the nukes would have nailed the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. They really needed to take out those remaining carriers that were in port for repairs. Sensing the other officers staring at him, waiting for his orders, Pang exclaimed, "Prepare our missiles to launch. The Americans may have taken a lot of our warheads out, but I'd wager they expended a lot of their missile interceptors to do it. That means more of our own missiles should have a better chance of getting through. I want our missiles ready to start firing in the next 5 minutes." With his orders issued, the Chinese prepared to land their second blow against the American fleet and naval facilities on Hawaii. Ojos Negros, Mexico. The air in the bunker felt warm and stifling as sweat ran down the side of General Han Lei's face. He was nervous, more nervous than at any other time in his military career. His life trajectory rode on what would happen today. As he rubbed his hands together, General Han could feel the sweat forming on them. He listened to the various news feeds and other data being supplied to them from around the world, but suddenly realized his right leg had started bouncing up and down under the table due to nerves. He surveyed the other faces in the 38th PLA Army group around him. They all looked just as nervous, unsure if they were about to die in the next 30 minutes or if their ruse was really going to work. When they had fired off their EMP missiles at California and Texas, they had known the Americans would retaliate. What they didn't know was whether the Americans would try and hit them with their own EMP weapons, or if they would attempt to burn them all to ash in a nuclear fireball. For more than a week, they had been carefully moving most of their vehicles to a series of large, abandoned warehouses in the city of Ojos Negros, some 97 miles south of the California border, and the town of Chihuahua, 235 miles south of El Paso, Texas. They were keeping their army close to where they had previously established a military encampment, hoping the Americans wouldn't notice they'd moved their troops and equipment a few days before the EMP attack. Meanwhile, they had worked with the Mexican government and army to build up massive military encampments around Guadalupe, north of the port city of Ensenada, and Galeana, near the Texas border, to make it appear like they were getting up to attack from those 2 points. The Chinese and Mexicans had spent the last 3 weeks making those encampments appear to be the main staging areas for the 38th and 65th PLA Army groups. Hundreds of radio transmissions were generated daily from the camps, along with other fake communications. They had even moved mock tanks and artillery by collaborating with news outlets and TV and movie producers to incorporate special effects and launch a coordinated disinformation campaign. Meanwhile, both army groups had been dispersed into a couple of other cities further away. General Han had chosen to hunker down with the 38th Army Group in a series of caves and bunkers, while their vehicles were hidden in specially designed warehouses that would protect them from the effects of the EMP. "I sure hope the Americans don't find us," one of the officers commented nervously. Turning to look at his men, General Han puffed his chest out a bit as he spoke, attempting to project more confidence than he currently felt. "We have done all we can. Our fate has already been decided. We will either live and fight, or we will die today. If the Americans do attack and we survive, I'm going to need you to rally your men quickly to retrieve our equipment and get it ready to move. Our orders are to invade America in 48 hours. California-Mexico border. Naval Outlying Landing Field, Imperial Beach. Corporal Isaacs of the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit looked at the control panel of the V-22 Osprey. He held his breath as he depressed the power button. A second later, he was rewarded by a series of buttons lighting up and the whirring sound of the generator starting the engine. Looking out the cockpit, he flashed a quick thumbs up and smile to the others outside. After swapping out a circuit board that wasn't as hardened as the manufacturer had led the Marines to believe, they were back in business. Shortly after the Chinese had detonated the EMP, the mechanics that were responsible for the maintenance of the Marine Medium Tilt Rotor Squadron 163 swiftly ran through a systems check of the squadron's V-22 Ospreys. They soon discovered that a few control boards responsible for providing the engines and the rest of the aircraft with power had shorted out. Fortunately for them, this was a part that often had problems, so their supply section kept a lot of them on hand. They were doubly lucky in that the supply building had been hardened against EMPs back during the Cold War era. As the aircraft mechanics went to work getting the squadron's helicopters operational again, the motor pool mechanics likewise did their best to prepare the 3/5 Marines' LAVs, AAVs, and JLTVs for combat. No one knew for sure when the Chinese would attack, but after they had hit the area with an EMP, it was only a matter of when, not if. Staff Sergeant Mack saw Lance Corporal Pyro shifting uncomfortably in his peripheral vision. "Staff Sergeant, you really think the Chinese are going to invade soon?" Pyro asked. Mack lifted his head to look at his troop more carefully before he spat a stream of tobacco juice on the ground. "Does it matter, Pyro?" he asked dismissively. "I'd rather be shooting and killing Chinese than stuck pulling garrison duty in L.A., or dealing with those CDF militia types. My friend that works over at headquarters told me the Chinese nuked one of our carrier strike groups, took the Reagan right out." Staff Sergeant Mack ignored the comment. He'd spotted movement over to the side and had pulled his field glasses back up to his eyes. "What do you see?" Pyro asked nervously. 3 o'clock, about 20 meters past the fence. I think I spotted a soldier." Looking through the more advanced spotter scope, Pyro scanned the dilapidated buildings, alleyways, and homes that were near the border wall. "Got it," he confirmed. "You're right. It looks like a soldier. He's wearing some kind of body armor. You want me to send up the drone?" "No, they'll hear it. But I'm calling this in," Mack said. Then he reached down to hit the talk button on his radio. "Loki 6, this is Loki 1-6. We've got movement along the border. Sector 3 Delta. How copy?" A few seconds went by before they got a reply. 1-6, this is Loki 6. Copy that. Movement in Sector 3 Delta. What do you have for us? "Tell them I now see 6 soldiers," Pyro called out as he continued to look through his spotter scope. "It looks like 2 of them are setting up some optics on the roof of that building just to the left of the blue liquor store." Mack passed on the message before he asked, "Do you want us to attack these guys or continue to observe and report?" Truthfully, Sergeant Mack hoped they'd be given permission to engage them. He didn't like the idea of another sniper team setting up a position a few hundred meters away from him. The slightest movement on their part could result in a bullet. A minute went by this time before they got a reply. 1-6, you're cleared to engage. Report back when you've neutralized the hostiles." Kicking Pyro's foot slightly, Mack whispered, "We're cleared to attack. Let's figure out what they're all at before we take out that team on the roof. I don't want to start shooting and suddenly find out there's a damn platoon of them nearby and we just didn't see them." Lance Corporal Pyro nodded and went back to looking for enemy soldiers in his scope. While Pyro was busy, Mack decided to crawl out of his position and make sure the rest of his squad knew what was going on. When Sergeant Mack found their resident sharpshooter, Private First Class Tapper, he smiled. "Tapper, just the man I was looking for," Mack remarked. "I want you to set up your long gun next to Pyro. If we can, I'd like to try and take these guys out with our long guns so we can avoid attracting more attention than necessary." Tapper nodded and dutifully went to work. Soon, they were both sitting next to Lance Corporal Pyro, scanning for additional targets. Unexpectedly, a single shot rang out. None of Mac's soldiers took their eyes off the targets in front of them, but they heard the radio squawk. The friendly sniper team further down the line and to their left was engaging a target. Sergeant Mac continued to peer through his scope and saw that the enemy soldiers had set up a high-powered optical lens on the top of the building. One of the hostiles was looking through the lens while another soldier nearby wrote something down on a clipboard. If Mac had to guess, these guys were range-finding certain terrain features and possible routes for an attacker to use. Speaking barely above a whisper to Tapper, Mac ordered, "Hit the guy with the clipboard first. He looks like he may be an officer." Taking a deep breath, Tapper slowly let it out and then pulled the trigger. Bang! Mac saw the soldier with the clipboard flop to the ground like a broken doll. Tapper worked the bolt quickly, ejecting the spent casing and slamming a fresh round into the chamber. In a fraction of a second, he had the rifle aimed at the soldier looking through the spotting scope and pulled the trigger a second time. Bang! Sergeant Mac witnessed the second soldier being thrown backward from the force of the bullet as it hit his head. As bloody mist and chunks of brain matter splattered on the other soldiers on the roof, they dove for cover. Staying calm, Tapper moved his reticle down to the ground floor, where two other soldiers were standing guard. Sergeant Mac had noticed that those men had moved inside the building. However, one of them was looking through a window, trying to see if he could spot what was going on. Mac watched in suspense as his squad's best shooter sent another round across the U.S.-Mexican border, taking the man out. "Damn good shot, Tapper," Mac praised. Private First Class Tapper was still somewhat new to his squad. He hailed from Wyoming and was an avid elk hunter. Clearly, shooting long-range game had helped him become an excellent shot. "The guys on the roof have come out to play again," called out Lance Corporal Pyro, who had continued to watch the building with the spotter scope. Tapper shifted his aim. "I hope he can take him out before they call an artillery strike on us," thought Sergeant Mac. Bang! The round flew flat and true, slamming right into the spotting lens and into the face of the enemy soldier who'd been looking through it. "Hot damn, that was a good shot, Private," exclaimed one of the Marines in their squad. Before any of them could say anything else, a machine gun opened fire further down the line. Turning to look at what was going on a few hundred meters to their left, Mac saw one of the fire teams was exchanging gunfire with at least a squad-sized element of enemy soldiers on the opposite side of the border. A minute later, the small skirmish had already escalated into a much larger clash. A platoon-sized element was closing in on the lone Marine machine gun position. "At least the fire team is positioned in a good spot overlooking the border," thought Sergeant Mac. If an enemy unit was going to cross, they'd have to pass under heavy fire from that position. As the shooting continued to escalate, Mac heard a call for a fire mission come through over the radio. The higher-ups must not have wanted to tip off the enemy that they had a battery of 155mm howitzers not too far away, because they opted to hit the enemy with mortars from their heavy weapons platoon. Soon the telltale whistling flew overhead toward the enemy. The first mortar slammed into a building the enemy soldiers were using for cover. A column of smoke and debris climbed into the sky. A few more mortar rounds landed in the area, damaging other nearby structures. Shortly after the dust settled, the shooting ended. From the Daily Mail. The world stands aghast at China's use of nuclear bombs and electromagnetic pulse weapons. Yesterday, the Chinese government detonated two separate EMP devices. One, which was released just north of San Diego, California, has disabled the power from much of Southern California and has destroyed most electronic devices and equipment in the vicinity. The second EMP device was detonated over Oahu and is thought to have been targeting the American military bases around Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In addition, 6 additional nuclear weapons were detonated by Chinese forces against the U.S. One nuclear device targeted the Arizona city of Yuma along the American southwest border. Another hit a critical munitions factory on the northeast side of the state of Oklahoma. 2 nuclear devices destroyed the USS Reagan carrier strike group, and 2 additional nuclear weapons destroyed the island territory and American forward military bases on Guam. During this unprecedented nuclear and EMP attack by the Chinese, the Australian city of Alice Springs was also hit by a high-altitude EMP device, causing a blackout across much of the Australian Northwest Territory. It is believed the Chinese were targeting the joint Australian-U.S. electronic spy base at Pine Gap. The U.S. government has confirmed that the Chinese attempted to detonate a total of 36 nuclear weapons against U.S. forces and American cities. Most of these warheads were successfully intercepted by the U.S. Army's THAAD missile defense system. 32 minutes into the nuclear attack by the Chinese, President Jonathan Sachs ordered a nuclear response on the People's Republic of China. The U.S. hit various Chinese nuclear missile bases, storage facilities, and other military bases associated with Chinese nuclear weapons program. American nuclear missiles also hit more than a dozen People's Liberation Army military headquarters and other command and control centers. In addition, the Americans also used 2 tactical nuclear weapons on Chinese military formations in Mexico. It is unclear how many casualties the Chinese or Mexicans have sustained during the nuclear counterattack. President Sachs further ordered a nuclear attack on the Three Gorges Dam in China as part of the American retaliation. When the dam collapsed, it released 22 cubic kilometers of water into the Yangtze River and valley below. A wall of water as high as 100 meters raced down the valley toward the Chinese cities of Yichang, Jingzhou, Changsha, and Wuhan. It is unclear how many people may have died in the ensuing flood, or what the damage has been to these cities. It is expected that destruction is going to be severe, and the loss of life will probably be in the tens of millions, if not more. United Nations Security General Johan Baer has pleaded with both sides to refrain from further use of nuclear weapons and has decried their use by both nations. Ramona, California. "Do you think the power will come back on soon?" Julie asked her husband, Bill. Their 6-year-old daughter donned her most pouty face and exclaimed, "I want to watch Masha and the bear." Bill looked at his daughter, trying his best to be brave for her. "Molly, Bear, remember when Daddy said the power may not come back on for a while?" he asked. His daughter looked up at him and nodded, but didn't say anything. "I don't know when it'll come back on, honey," Bill said, gently hugging her. "But tomorrow we're going to go on a little hike. We're going to go stay with Auntie Jessie, remember?" "Yeah. Can I bring my mama bear with me?" she asked. Her face showed genuine concern at the possibility of leaving her giant stuffy behind. "We'll see. I need to go outside and work on the truck, okay? Stay in here and help your mother." She nodded and grabbed her mama's hand. Bill put his shoes on and headed into the garage. He opened the large door so the natural light could flood in. He still had a few things he needed to fix on the old 1973 Ford F-100 XLT. It had been a hobby of his since he was a teenager, fixing up old cars. Bill's dad had been a Vietnam vet and an alcoholic. Their relationship had been pretty volatile growing up, but when his dad had quit drinking his freshman year in high school, things had changed for the better. To help make up for lost time, his dad had bought an old Ford pickup truck. Despite being an alcoholic, his father had maintained a job as an ASC Master Tech mechanic. It was the one thing he had always been good at, aside from drinking. When he had given up alcohol, he'd sought to rebuild his relationship with his son by teaching him how to work on trucks. During that freshman year of high school, they'd rebuilt that truck and then sold it during the summer. His dad had let him keep the money from the sale, and Bill had bought 2 more old trucks, one to fix up and use to drive himself to school, and the other to sell and make some money. Fixing up cars and trucks became a bonding experience for them. When Bill had turned 18, he had gone to a technical school and learned how to become an even better mechanic. What Bill liked most was working on the cars built before 1977, before the automakers began to introduce computer chips into them. Vehicles continued to get more complicated and harder to work on with each passing decade. When Bill had found this 1973 F-100 truck on Facebook Marketplace 4 months ago, he'd swiftly snatched it up. He'd just gotten the last major set of parts he needed to make it run 2 weeks ago. Judging by what was going on in the world, it couldn't have come at a better time. Bill glanced up and saw his neighbor from down the road approaching his driveway. "Hey, John, how are things going?" asked Bill. John smiled as he walked up toward the garage. "They're going all right. I thought I'd come over here and check in on you guys." Bill wiped some grease off of his hands as he walked up to John. The two shook hands. "I was listening to that little AM radio you gave me yesterday," Bill said. "They say all of Southern California is without power." John nodded. "I was talking with a guy on the ham radio earlier this morning. He lives over in Utah. He was telling me the Chinese detonated an EMP over Southern California, hit Arizona and Oklahoma with a nuke as well." Bill let out a low whistle. They'd heard bits and pieces of what had happened a couple of days ago, but nothing definitive. One of their other neighbors, a few houses down the road, was a retired Marine. He'd said the Chinese were probably going to invade California soon. He also had an older car that still worked. He'd packed up his wife and some of their belongings, and they'd left a day ago. He told them they should work on getting out of the area as soon as they could. "You think you're going to have it running today?" asked John as he leaned up against the workbench. "I think so. I just need to put a few finishing touches on it." "What are you doing for fuel?" John asked. "I siphoned the gas out of our other cars. Got enough for a full tank on this thing, and a couple of 5-gallon cans to bring along with us. Are you and Jill going to come with us?" Bill inquired. He'd offered to give them a ride out of the area if they wanted. Smiling, John nodded. "We will. I've got a pistol and a deer rifle I'll bring with us. I don't have a lot of ammo, but hopefully we won't need it." Bill grabbed a wrench and tightened something before he replied. "That's good, John. I hate to say this, but I don't even own a gun. I'll be glad to have you bring yours. Just make sure you get your stuff over here tonight. We're going to leave at dawn tomorrow. I don't want to be on the road at night if possible." "Makes sense to me. It's starting to get crazy at night. I heard a few gunshots last night. I think things are starting to fall apart the longer we go without power." Bill shook his head in disgust and set his wrench down on his tool chest. "This is crazy, John. Everything that's going on right now. I don't understand it. I don't understand how it's all come to this. I mean, I walked down to Main Street yesterday afternoon to see if the pharmacy was possibly open. I wanted to see if I'd somehow be able to get a refill on Julie's thyroid medication. But the entire place had been looted. I mean, who loots a CVS when the power's been out for 2 days? People are freaking out. What I'd like to know is when these CDF or National Guard soldiers are going to start helping out. The governor keeps telling us help is on the way, but I've yet to see a single National Guard vehicle or anyone else come to Ramona. Yeah, I'm not counting on help to arrive anytime soon, Bill replied. I'm just glad my wife's built up a 6-month supply of Julie's medicine. She'd be dead in a couple of weeks without it. I just hope when we get to Las Vegas, things will be better. He used a ratchet to tighten down a bolt. John rubbed the back of his neck. Hey, Bill, if you don't mind, we're going to spend the night at your place. I think we all might be safer if we stay together. Also, don't start the truck. I know you'll want to make sure she runs, but it's best to wait and do that tomorrow when we're ready to leave. If you start it now, people will hear it. That could attract some attention we don't need or want. Wow, I hadn't even thought about that, John. Good call. Why don't you and Jill start getting your stuff brought over here now, then? I want to get this thing loaded up as soon as I get this last thing here finished. John agreed and left to go back to his house. An hour later, he and his wife came over with 2 rolling suitcases. They went back to their house and came back with a second load of stuff. Only this time, they had a small garden cart full. It was packed with 5 flats of water and a lot of freeze-dried food. The 3 of them went to work, loading the bed of the truck with the essentials they'd need for the trip to Vegas. It was roughly a 350-mile journey, and God only knew what they'd encounter along the way. If they were able to use the interstate and there wasn't much traffic, the drive would normally take around 6 hours, but Bill doubted that would be an option. Once they had the truck loaded up, they looked over an old AAA road atlas John had and started mapping out their path. Their path was to travel along the back roads as much as possible, trying to avoid any major cities or towns along the way. The following morning, just before dawn, everyone loaded up in the pickup. John and Bill were going to sit in the front with their wives, and Bill's daughter would sit in the back of the bay right behind the cab. They did their best to keep their supplies below the lip of the bed so as to not attract more attention than they wanted. When John raised the garage door up, Bill placed the key in the ignition. He was pretty confident it would start. He turned the key and hoped for the best. An instant later, the truck roared to life. Bill put the truck into gear and drove out of the garage. John closed the door and locked it. Not that they'd be coming back to their house any time soon, but still it felt good to leave it locked. John climbed in, and they started driving out of the neighborhood. Fortunately, the sun had just come up, and most people were still sleeping. They made it a few miles down the road before they saw the first signs of life. A couple of people were sitting on their front porch. They nodded toward them as they drove by, as if they hadn't a care in the world. For the next hour, they managed to avoid nearly every major city and town along the way, although they knew they'd eventually have to drive along the frontage road of I-10 as they headed to Desert Center. There was a small state road, Highway 177, that would lead them to Highway 62. From there, they'd continue on until they reached Vidal Junction. Then they'd turn onto Highway 95 and stay on that road until they reached Las Vegas. The scariest moment of the trip was when they reached the frontage road along I-10. The highway was littered with dead vehicles. Cars, trucks, semi-trucks, all stopped right where their electronics had fried. They saw some people among the abandoned cars. A few of them tried to flag them down for help, but John insisted they not stop. I hate to say it, but chances are they'd try to rob us and steal the truck, he insisted. The entire drive along I-10 was nerve-wracking. When they eventually made it into the less-traveled state road, they all breathed a sigh of relief. With such slow going, they did ultimately have to stop for the night. When they did, Bill used the 2 5-gallon jerry cans and topped off their tank. They had burned through most of their gas, having to take all the detours. It was a long, frigid evening. The next morning, they got back on the road just as the sun started to crest into the sky. It took them another hour until they reached a small town called Searchlight, roughly 52 miles south of Vegas. As they approached the town, they spotted a couple of military vehicles blocking the highway. Bill slowed the truck down as they neared the roadblock. Several soldiers walked out from around the vehicles and held their arms up, signaling for them to stop. One of the soldiers walked up to them with his rifle at the low ready. The other soldiers had their rifles raised slightly as they covered their friend. "Morning. Where are you folks headed?" asked the soldier as he eyed them and their vehicle suspiciously. Bill smiled as he replied, "My sister lives over in Henderson. That's where we're trying to go." The soldier nodded. "Where did you guys come from?" he asked. "Ramona. It's a small town in East San Diego County. We've been out of power for a few days now. I needed to try and get my wife and daughter to a safer place. I hope you can understand," Bill replied. "God, I hope this isn't going to be a problem," he wished, eyeing the soldiers' weapons with trepidation. The soldier's demeanor seemed to soften a bit. "I understand. Word has it the Chinese are going to invade California soon. You probably got out at the right time." The man stretched as he eyed the contents of the back of the truck. Finally, he announced, "So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to allow you to pass through and head to Henderson, but nowhere else. We'll write up a travel pass. You'll need to present this to any other checkpoints you come across. We're trying to limit the number of people crossing over into the Las Vegas area right now, especially those coming from California. So what I need you to do is pull over to that parking lane over there. We'll do a quick search of your vehicle, give you 10 gallons of gas, and have you on your way, all right?" Bill nodded, relieved that they'd be allowed to pass through. He followed the other soldiers' directions, and they pulled into one of the vehicle lanes and got out. The soldiers spent a few minutes searching through their meager belongings, while a couple of other soldiers questioned them about what they had seen on their way up here. They asked a lot of questions about California CDF units and any signs of Chinese soldiers. Fortunately, Bill and his family hadn't come across any of those two groups. Half an hour later, they were finally sent on their way. They made it to his sister's house an hour later. She and her husband welcomed them with open arms, along with Bill's neighbor and his wife. They had now officially joined the ranks of internally displaced refugees in their own country.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.